Oh no, I'm not brave enough for politics.
One of the most iconic lines from Halo comes from Halo 2 when the Master Chief says, "I need a weapon." So that got us thinking, can you beat Halo 1, 2, and 3 without a weapon? Or at least without shooting a single shot? Well, today we decided to embark on this quest and find out definitively, once and for all, can you beat Halo without shooting? Let's get into it. As we look at the first Halo game, we knew that this would kind of be one of the interesting ones to look at right away, and Pillar of Autumn actually is relatively easy to make your way through without firing a single shot. It's definitely one of those point A and point B levels, and fortunately you can just bash your way past any enemies or just run by them and hope that they don't kill you. We actually beat this first level no problem, and we're feeling pretty optimistic about the run for Halo CE. We went to the level Halo next, and honestly, after you punch your way past the first wave of the firefight, you can just drive through majority of the level, take out some enemies by either splattering them or punching them, and try not to run over your teammate in the process. And I think this level was a good indicator that the Warthog levels for the most part will be something that we can manage. But when we got to Truth and Reconciliation, we did realize early on that the beginning section of the level was quite challenging just because there's a lot of enemies in different directions, and especially when you get into the inside part, you have to look out and you kind of have to jump around and panic a little bit, but ultimately we made it through Truth and Reconciliation all right. Also, Silent Cartographer is actually a level where you can get an achievement if you do this on solo without shooting, and since we already knew the routes for this one, it was pretty straightforward to get through this level, except I do have to say at the end there is a sword elite, and once again he will track you down and chase you if you're not careful, and that's probably the biggest risk you have on Silent Cartographer. Assault in the Control Room is a long level, and honestly we just ran through and punched everything and just tried to get through everything as quickly as we could. We managed to jump over the bridge to skip a section of the level, which was pretty nice. However, as we approached the back half of Halo CE, things started to get a little bit more challenging. When we got to 343 Guilty Spark, we did notice there were several sections where the Flood would rush at you, especially when you first encounter the Flood, and you have to hold out and kill all the Flood before the next wave of Flood will come out and eventually open up the door you can exit through. But since we can't shoot our weapons, taking out the smaller Flood forms would be a little bit more challenging, except ultimately we realized since we were doing this run on easy that we could just let them eat us and we usually wouldn't die. So we kind of just let them eat us and then they would explode in the process. That was one way to solve that. When the larger Flood forms would eventually come in, we were relieved that at least in Halo 1 we're able to punch our way through them, even though they're much harder than fighting through the Covenant, and honestly you can get stuck indoors and be killed really easily, and this was pretty frustrating because it happened to both of us at times. The library, being the fan favorite Halo level in the Halo universe, was just as fun as always, especially because we couldn't shoot and this whole level is based around firefights, so a lot of the time we were either waiting around just bashing our way through the Flood and throwing grenades and dodging the enemy attacks, or we were getting lost and walking in circles because since we spent so much time trying to skip fighting the Flood, we would sometimes backtrack to where we started from, thinking that we were going the right way because there were still Flood in that area. When we finally reached 2 Betrayals, this level also ended up being somewhat challenging as we got back into the main bridge room that is kind of indoors connecting the 2 canyons together. This section was really difficult because pretty much there is a ton of Flood blocking the door and you have to clear them out before making your way forward. Then you have to pair that with the fact that you're in a really wide open space, which means that you can't really throw grenades and corner the Flood, and some of them have rocket launchers, and this is where we died quite a few times trying to figure it out. And honestly, the solution we came up with was that if you go up to the door button enough times, eventually it actually works. So either we weren't pressing the button hard enough or believing the door would open enough, but finally after trying the door several times it did open, and then we just ran away and hoped hoped that we didn't get shot by the rocket flood. Getting into the level keys, while this level is possible to beat without shooting, it definitely was more challenging than other levels just because of the high saturation of enemies throughout this level. There's so many flood you have to run by, and holding out at the grav lift when you don't have any weapons to shoot with is super difficult and challenging, as the enemies will swarm at you and you just have to hope you time your grenades correctly and that the grav lift actually lifts you up and puts you in the level quick enough. Then when you're in the inside section of this level, you have a lot of tight corridors and enemies around every turn, and honestly we had to do just a lot of sprinting, jumping, and dodging to hope that the flood wouldn't kill us. One of the more challenging levels, but it is still possible. And then getting on to the Maw, this level actually wasn't too bad for the most part. The only challenging thing was getting the ventilators grenaded at the right time, because you're getting shot at by sentinels constantly and the flood's jumping on you, so it's easy to get knocked down and killed. But if you manage to stay on and you blow up the ventilators, you can get onto the driving section, and honestly the driving section you don't have to shoot on anyways. So we made it through Halo Combat Evolved without shooting, and we were pretty proud of ourselves, but we knew we had a bigger feat ahead of us, that we had to beat the entire Halo trilogy. So we moved forward onto Halo 2 to see if it's possible to beat Halo 2 without shooting a weapon. And upon playing through Cairo Station, we realized that Halo 2 is very, very boring if you're not allowed to shoot your gun. But still, we made our way through Cairo Station, punching our ways to each room, and in most sections of this level, you have to kill all the enemies before the door opens up, which could be kind of frustrating, having to backtrack and find whichever enemy straggler is left behind to punch. And the section with the buggers flying through the air is a little bit more challenging, as they are more difficult to melee, but eventually you can kill them and make your way through this complete level. The next level, Outskirts, is a little bit easier though, because you can pretty much fly through it by jumping across the buildings at the beginning, and then we can jump on a ghost and just drive to the end of this level. Metropolis, on the other hand, was pretty easy at the beginning. We just kind of drove through, and honestly the Marines were pretty fun in the Gauss cannon, just going to town fighting off the Covenant. When we got to the Scarab, this was one part we knew from the beginning of this challenge would probably be one of the harder points, but other than us not jumping on the Scarab correctly, we were able to board the Scarab relatively easy, punch the enemies as they jumped out towards us, and then when we got inside the Scarab, we made it a point to quickly kill the elites before they would pull their swords out, which probably would have been the biggest risk on this level. As we switched to the level The Arbiter, we finally had sword technology and invisibility, which made honestly this run so much better, being able to swing your sword. The level The Arbiter is relatively easy, especially with the help of the sword, since the level's kind of built for stabbing. We came into a really big challenge, however, when we got to the level The Oracle, the following level, and honestly the elevator section of this level is so challenging to get through without shooting, as the flood is constantly dropping. You have to worry about the sentinels shooting at you, and when you're relying on your sword, if you swing, Halo 2 physics kick in and sometimes lunge you way up in the air or off of the elevator platform, causing you to die. And if you're not careful, you can easily be killed by either the flood or the sentinels, and slashing our way through this one really wasn't an option, and we had to decide what was more important, using our sword at times or meleeing with a gun, hoping that it would do enough damage to keep us alive to begin with. Fortunately enough, after enough trial and error, we did get through this level as well, but this was definitely the most challenging level we had done so far. On Delta Halo, we really didn't have anything to work